We are up to the fifth Pedic, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, in the Masechta Yoma. So we're continuing the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol. They brought out to him the spoon, his ladle, this amachte, and they brought out to him the shovel. And now, the Gemara explained before, we learned there was a shovel that they took the coal and they put it down on the fourth row. And this shovel now was a different shovel, where they brought potatoes from the house of Artinus, the base of Artinus, and they brought it to the Kohen Gadol. Okay, so they brought this to the second master. They brought the coal and the ladle, to the empty ladle, to the Kohen Gadol. Chafan Malay Chafnov. He then went ahead and put in his 2 handfuls. The Nasan Letecha Kafa Gadol, and he placed the potatoes into that ladle. Lefi Godloi, depending on the size of the Kohen Gadol's hand, that's how much. No, there's no measure how much potatoes has to go into the hand, depending on the hand. And we'll see the one later, it has to be full and a little bit floating above. The kach hoisam midasa, and that was the measurement of the potatoes. Not to be minay, and then off he went into the base of Migdal. So not to be minay, he took the shovel in his right hand, and the ladle with the potatoes in it, he took in his left hand. This machta that he's taking now is back the machta, the other machta that already they took before with the coal in it. Now he had to bring it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So he took that machta with the coal in it in his right hand, and the ladle with the potatoes in it, he took that in his left hand. Which the Gemara is going to wonder why the potatoes ended up in the left hand. Says the Gemara, first of all, it wasn't a machta shovel. Tanilei, we learned before already that he took the shovel. We learned not as a machta of all those. We learned before already had took a shovel. He went up to call and brought it down. What's this machta going on again? Also, Gemara. They were to a machta, the gecholim, different shovel. They was a shovel that you filled with coal. You took it down. You put it on the fourth row. Hocha machta dictators. Here we're talking about the machta of potatoes, the shovel of potatoes. The Tanya we learned. They took out to him. They learned the Braisa. It says they produced for him kafrek on an empty ladle. Milishchas hakelim. They took out from the chamber of the vessel. They brought him a ladle. Umachta, and another shovel gedusha shel potatoes that were full with potatoes. Milishchas base of Tinus, from the house of base of chamber of base of Tinus. So it's a different shovel altogether. Then we say chafim lechafnav. He fills up his hand. He takes a handful or scoops a handful. What is that all about? The noisa techa kafa gadol, hagadol fi gadol, hagadol fi gadol, v'kach hoisim. That was the measure. Kaf b'yem kibur lamli. Why even have a ladle? All the trader says is take a fistful. So why are you taking a fist, put it in the ladle, then you bring it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and from there you're going to take a fistful. Why go through the exercise? Says you have no braid. What do we have no braid? What else are you going to do? Should he go and bring in, let's say, the potatoes and bring into Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then step outside and bring, let's say, the coal. The Torah says he should go in. It says he has the coal and he has the potatoes, and it says and he goes in. The Havi based on Parashas is a one entrance, 2 entrances. So he has to bring both at the same time. So what do you want? You want him to have, we're not about 15 lines from the top. So you want him to have 2 fistfuls. You want him to have 2 fistfuls, and the coal to be brought in at the same time. How? So you want to put you're supposed to take the potatoes in his handful. So he takes the handful of potatoes, and then you want then that the frying pan should be sitting right on top of the potatoes. We'll later bring it in. The question is, how does he get in there? I don't know if he has his hand full of potatoes and he puts the hot burning coal on top of the potatoes, it's pretty dangerous as well. Anyway, let's say that's what happens. So when he arrives into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, how does he remove the hot coal from it? Does he take it off? In other words, he takes a fistful of potatoes, and some other kohen who brings them the machta of the coal, places on top of the coal. When he's in Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's there alone. How is he going to remove it? Kimoti, when it comes into the Kashrashim, what should you do? Nishkale b'shine, how is he going to take the frying pan with the coal off his hand? Is he going to use his teeth? The nachte lemachte and place the thing on the ground. Hashtus the melbos of Dominozike, mother for a human king. This is totally inappropriate. Leave the melech malchi hamlochim before the Abishter himself. Alachas kama, this is inappropriate. Hilcha therefore, you have no breda. You have no breda. And you cannot make 2 trips, nor can you make 1 trip and then put the coal on top of the potatoes and bring it in and put it in the ground. So what do? Since you have no breda, you do exactly the way it was done by the Nasim. That you have 1 ladle full of potatoes. Instead of a handful, you put it in a ladle that we just read last week. So therefore, you're able to carry both at the same time. The right hand, the coal, the left hand, the ladle. Says the Gemara, not to be me. You took the shovel in your right hand with the coal, that's a kaf, this one, and the ladle with the potatoes, which is essential that this is the highlight of Yom Kippur. You put in your left hand. Right? The Gemara, the famous saying, Yitziva Ba'ara, the one who was posted permanently, you toss him to the ground. The Giyera, and the one who's a visitor, Bishmei Shemaya, you elevate him and you exalt him to the heavens. The potatoes, which is the most important thing, you put in your left hand, and the coal, which is secondary, you would go with the right hand. Vishtimt. So we answer Zumarube v'Zumuetes, because the coal is 3 kavin. Usually 2 handfuls is less than 3 kavin, and therefore you need more strength in your right hand. So that's why you carry the coal. And even at a time. Some people have larger hands, so your hands together also is 3 kavin. Even so, it didn't make any changes. Like the story of Rabbi Shmuel ben Kimchis, who's a Kohen Gadol, and that's the answer. In other words, the Gemara is saying here, according to the Bach, this is the end of the sugya. The Gemara is saying here that like plug, once he decided most Kohen in the hands are smaller, so therefore the right hand should carry the heavier weight. The other guess is Zuchama v'Zutzenenes. The coal is hot and it's harder to carry, and the potatoes is cold, so therefore you have that in your right hand. Now that you mentioned Bishmol ben Kimchis, Omer Olav. He said about the Bishmol ben Kimchis, Arbos Kavin b'Meloi Chavnav. His hands were so large that he would take actually 4 kavin in his hands. And they used to say, Kol Hanoshim, all the women, Zardu, were Zardu. The Gemara said in a minute what that means. But my mother, Olagag, when it was supreme, went to the top. What do you mean? Ikidami, others say, we're talking about arson. Arson actually explains is kind of the way you wheat. Either you break it into 3 parts, 4 parts, 5 parts. So it's a kind of wheat that you normally give to a sick person. And arson is actually very good for a sick person, and therefore, and my mother used to eat that, and that helped her. Talking about in the shichva zera, that the shichva zera that impregnated my mother was the top one. Because Rabu asked a question. It says Vatazreini. David HaMelech said Vatazreini Chaylam Chami spelled the Tov Zayin Reish. Even another pasuk says that it says Vatazreini with an aleph. Chaylam Chami, you wrapped me around and you gave me the strength to fight. Why once with an aleph, not an aleph? Zadi Sani, he said today, Mr. Zadi Sani, that you made sure that my mother had the top shich zera to from more than millions of sperms. It's the top one that impregnated fertilized my mother's egg. Vizenas Tani, and then as a result of that, you gave me the strength to fight. So the same thing of Sholem Kimchis. Now, why was she zeichet to have a sometime chach? Once he was talking to an Arab out in the marketplace, and some spittle fell out of the guy's mouth. Al begodav. Now, with the Rabbanan, we decided that all guy's liquids are metame, like a zava or a ziva, but that's only with the Rabbanan. But so therefore, but it's machmer, because even though technically the spittle of a goy makes it tummy. All you have to do is go to mikveh. You don't need head of shemesh. It's not like a full yom, but you need head of shemesh. Nevertheless, they were machmir. The nichnes Yeshevav Achiv, his brother Yeshevav, stepped in v'shimish tachtov and took over for the day, or took over that day of Yom Kippur. The Rasa Iman Shnei Kohenim Dolim b'Yemechad, and the mother saw two Kohenim Dolim in one day. Again, the similar story happened. V'shuv Amr Lo V'Shmuel Ben Kimchis, Adron Kir Pamachad Yotzi went v'Siper Im Adon Echa B'Shuk. He was talking to this guy out in the marketplace, and the Nitza Tzenoida B'Pivav Godav, and it landed on his clothes. The Nichnes Yosef Achiv B'Shimish. Now it's on Yom Kippur. What's he talking to an Arab on Yom Kippur? I don't understand both stories. Rashi says this happened on Yom Kippur. Pamachas Yom Kippur Haya. So why was he talking to an Arabi on Yom Kippur? When did he even have time? And he was in the base of media the whole time. And the other occasion, he was talking to some Goyish Lord. When did he have time for that? Or what was he doing? I don't understand what happened here exactly.
The other interesting is what we talked yesterday about the two Kohanim being side by side, being ready. And here they're two brothers.
True. But Rashi says it was in Yom Kippur. Could have said it was on the Stama day. But Rashi said it happened on Yom Kippur. So how did it happen? What was Rabbi Shmuel Kimchis doing outside the base when he was talking to Arabs on Yom Kippur day? The guys, Chulsha, the Kohen Gadol, were constantly worrying they have no time, they have no strength, they can't do anything, keep them up the whole night, they shouldn't be Masiach Das for a minute. And then he's talking to some Arab. And then he's talking to some Goy. And he didn't even learn. He had one story with an Arab. Next year he went out again, talked to some Goyim. I don't understand what actually happened there. But anyway, the Shimish Tachtov, and it's in the marketplace. What's he doing in the Bishuk on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol? Does he say anything over there? In your article, I don't know what's going on here.
I don't have an art scroll.
Oh, okay. Okay, bye tomorrow. And obviously, for some reason or another, he had to go and talk to this Arab. Fine. But once he went to talk to the Arab, and this happened to him, the next year he had to talk to this Odin. He could have just sent somebody else or gone another day. He should have learned his lesson from the year before. Anyway, V'shimish Tachtav Rosa Ima Shnei Kohen Dolim b'Mechad. Now, you're saying like Torah, but we learned Shiva Banim Hayalol Kimchas. He had 7 sons. V'Kulon Shimshu B'Kunik Dolim. All became Kohen Dolim. The Teizi Shonim said, not that Chassidus, each one died young and the next one took over. If kind of brachas that. Similar stories happened, and I'm sure the kid was a Kohen Gadol, but every time that he became Tameh, another brother stepped in. So basically, according to Teizi Shonim, 7 Yom Kippurs. 7 Yom Kippurs, Shmuel ben Kimchas went out to talk to Goyim, became Tameh, and his brother took over. Very strange. Very strange. Anyway. Says he went further. How is it that one woman should have to have 7 children, all kohenim dolim, even for a day? She said, that there wasn't a time that the walls of my house saw here from my head. We'll have in the Gemara Ksubas within the Ayin Beis all about this Das Moshe and Das Yehudis. And Das Moshe is what the Torah insists, and Das Yehudis is what became Jewish custom of the Rabbanon. And Das Moshe is that you have to cover different pshatim. The Gemara says that covering your hair is Mahatorah. Pru Rosh D'Oraisa, like we read in last week's Parsha. Upara Es Rosha, that we uncover her head. So a woman wearing it, but Das Yehudis is, according to some in her chutzner, that most of her hair should be covered. The basket is good enough, even though some hair is sticking out. And according to Moshe Shein, applies in the house as well. Others say in the house it may be different, but definitely according to halacha, some of the hairs are allowed to stick out in your house or in the chutzner. And she was so machmir that not one hair was protruding even inside her house where she should have been covered. Amrullah, so our Gemara's version actually is very interesting. Amrullah, they said to her, Hadba Osakain, we don't believe you for a minute. There are many women that were very snizdik, and even inside the house, not a hair was protruding from their sheitel or from their tichel. It didn't help them. They didn't have 7 children with the Kohen Gadol. In other words, they were saying to her, you must have had another schus, not that. But Rashi brings the pasuk called Kvuda Bas Melech Prima, Rashi seems not to have the girsa where they told her that we don't believe you. Rashi seems to say that is exactly why, because she was an isha tznua and kol kavud basmala prima, and then it says when mishpuzay zav lavusha, that her lavusha is from gold, which means that her children are going to dress in the 8 begodim a big day zav. So that's precisely what happened because it's sneeze. But our Gemara, interesting, says it's not to do with sneeze. It's some other schus that she had. We just don't know what it was. And obviously, the father had nothing to do with it. Interesting. The Gemara doesn't even ask. Maybe the father was the one who was zeicher to have 7 children to Kohen Gedolim. It's always about the mother. And in fact, we call her after the mother. We don't even call him Rabbi Shmuel ben like Shmuel Elisha. We don't call him by the father's name. We only call him the mother's name. So obviously, they all knew that the mother was a very special woman. They just wanted to know what it was. Says we learn, it says in Pasuk that you should take, so now we're talking about a mincha. By a mincha, you have to do a kmitza, which means you take, we learned before, you take your 3 middle fingers and you scoop out a part of the flour offering and you put that on the mizbeach, and the rest gets eaten by the kohanim. And then also on top of the mincha, you have lavonia, that incense, you put that in the mizbeach as well. It says in the pasuk when you take out your kmitza, means you use your fingers. You don't take some kind of a keli, some kind of utensil to break off the mincha. You actually use your fingers. Who asked a question? Can you? What about when it comes here to putting your handfuls of titus? If we know it has to be the measure of your hands, so you have to mamish use your hands, or can you mold a utensil that should be similar to the size of your hand and use that? So we say, now our question is as follows. When it comes to milk, it says clearly bekumtsai when you're using your own fingers clearly. So because it says bekumtsai, so therefore over there you cannot make a keli. Okay, I understand that. But my question is, I will don't say here bechafnav. It says malay chafnav. Filling your hands, it could be that's a measure, the size of the full of your hands. So maybe you could use a utensil. Elam malay chafnav. So therefore we don't care if you don't use your hands, use a keli. Or do we say no? We are going to learn. We're going to learn, but because it says the word malay by mekumtsai and it says the word malay by chafnaf, that they have to be the same. Mamish your hands, no vessels. It says in our Mishnah, after it says that depending on the size of your hand, that's how much potatoes you take out. And then that was the measure. Doesn't that sound like more that there was some kind of utensil and that's the size utensil you should make? It should be reflecting the size of the Kohen Gadol's hands of the day. My love, if he wants to make, let's say, if he wants to make not a cherem, if he wants to make a vessel or some kind of vessel that's that size, no problem, do that. No, maybe our mission means maybe it means that no. Maybe it means that he has to go with his hands, that he would go back inside. And in other words, he took a fistful, put it into the ladle. And then when the pasuk says, when the Mishnah says, it means when you go now, you step into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you do it again. You would take and fill your hands from the ladle and fill your hands again. That's what he did it again. Says the Gemara, and that's what it means. That doesn't mean means that was the measure of the keli they're going to use. It means that you did repeat the same exercise once you won the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Says the Gemara, yeah. In other words, you take after you put in the ladle, you walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you take from the ladle and you put it back into your hands, and so on. And from there you put it onto the kol. So we're saying, why don't we learn from here that why don't we learn from here then that we do twice the chafina? First, when they bring the coal, the shovel, the potatoes in the shovel, he takes a handful, he puts it in his hands, puts it then on the ladle, and then when he goes to Kedoshim, he takes the ladle, puts it in his hands again. And that's actually a question, and that's a question whether he does that 2 times or not. In other words, whether there's a question whether in the Kodesh Kedoshim he has to put his hands in again, and took malay chafnov and then put it on the coal, or he just spills it out directly from the ladle onto the coal? And that's a question. So where you learn pshat, the kach doesn't mean they did it again. So no, the Mishnah is ambiguous, and therefore you cannot bring it either way, because there's two ways of learning pshat in the Mishnah. Whatever you want to prove from the Mishnah, I can say maybe the pshat is the other way. So maybe you can tell me that it means you do it a second time. I'll say no. Maybe the Mishnah means you make a tool. When it says in the Mishnah, it means that you make a utensil that size. And Inam, if you can try to bring a proof that okay, let's say bring a utensil, then no. So maybe it means you do it a second time, which would be exactly a fistful. So you can't bring an information either way. It's very vague. So we still don't know pshat. So Tan Rabbanan, we learned. So no, we haven't resolved the question here. Which way is it? Do you make a utensil or don't make a utensil? We remain with the tzaddik here. With a question. Tan Rabbanan learned. It says in the pasuk, you fill up the kaimis, yochel mevudas. I would have thought that it could be sticking out, right? Because you have the mincha, the flour over, and you be sticking out of your hand. Doesn't matter. Big kumtza, it has to be all inside your 3 fingers. So no, it's not minus your thumb, minus your pinky, that you take, you scoop out the flour offering, you put your hand in sideways, you scoop out with the 3 fingers, and you fill it between your fingers and your palm, and your thumb and your pinky are not covering any of the flour. If we're talking about inside your hand, I would have thought I would have thought that you don't have to cover the entire hand, even just a little bit. Covers, you put a little bit of flour between your fingers and your palm is sufficient. So it has to fill it up. Kid comes to inch like people fill up. Okay, so what exactly do you do? So you take your 3 fingers and you rake the flour into your hand between your palm and your finger. You fill it up. The kaimitz and a piece of the other, the kaimitz, and then afterwards you take your thumb. And you keep your thumb and your pinky out, or the machlis, or the macheshes. This is the hard one. Some of the flour offerings is flour. Some of them you have to use a shallow frying pan first, or you use a deep frying pan. You break it up into pieces, and then you do your kimitza. And now it's sitting in your hand. And remember, you now have anything sticking out, but we want it to be full. We want you to use your thumb. Not your other hand, use your thumb to break all the pieces sticking out on top. We want you to use your pinky to break all the pieces sticking out on the bottom. On the other hand, when you break a piece, sometimes part of what's inside your hand will fall out with it. We don't want that. We want you to, the area between your 3 fingers and your palm to be full. Nothing should be missing there, and nothing should be sticking out. So it's one thing with flour, that's pretty easy to do, but when it comes to machlis or macheshes, that is very difficult. And that's why it says here, this is the most difficult avoid in the mikdash. Says the most difficult. We know malika taking up the nail of the thumb and shechting through the back of the bird, which is treif in normal birds. When it comes to kachim, that's the way to do it, is through malika, and that's supposed to be a very difficult avoida. First of all, using a nail to break through the bone, and others say you have to use your right hand to hold the chicken, hold the bird, while at the same time you're using your thumb, not the chicken, but the bird. At the same time to use your thumb to shut, that makes it even more difficult. And well, you can chafina. Chafina also, we'll see later in the Gemara, the next year of the how difficult it was, working your way around the ketaitis and the kol at the same time. This is one of the difficult avodas in Mikdash, but it wasn't the only difficult avodah. Says him further, Rabbi said, boy, Rabbi Shimon has a question. Bein habenayim. What about, let's say, between your fingers, what about some of the flour that gets stuck between your fingers? Is that considered part of the kaimit? Is that considered part of the leftovers in the mincha? What happens? Papa says, anything which is like facing the inside of your hand, then like the boiler question about the kaimit. So definitely it's kaimit. It's considered kaimit. The anything sticking outside between your fingers, sticking outside is no question. Like the boiler about the shiraimus leftovers. It's not part of the kaimit. Kita boiler, the beine mamish between your fingers. What's it din? He himself resolved it. Bein habenayim sofiginu. You're right. We don't know what the status is of the flour between your fingers, caught between your fingers. So hechi over, what do you do then? Amar Rab Chanina said, what you do is maktir kaimitz lechudet chila. First, you take the kaimitz, the part that's inside your hand, and you put it on the mizbech, and v'hodar bein habenayim, and afterwards you put on the bein habenayim on the mizbech. Why not reverse the order? Because if you're going to take what's between your fingers and put it in the mizbech first, could be dilma shirayinu, could be that's considered part of the remnants of the mincha, and the rule is you cannot bring the kaimitz on the mizbeach if any of the shirayim is missing. So if the benayim between your fingers is considered not the kaimitz part of the mincha, but the leftover, the residual part of the mincha, and then you put it on the mizbeach first, you can no longer bring the kaimitz onto the mizbeach. So therefore the kaimitz goes first, and then you put on the section of your finger, because the suffix, put it on the mizbeach as well. The shirayim shechasru make lactada. We consider shirayim that's missing between the kimitz and lactada. We learned shirayim shechasru ben kimitz and lactada. Any shirayim that is left over between the kimitz and lactada, a maktin is a kaim, which you can no longer bring the kimitz on top. So anybody hachiv. So if you're worried that maybe what that the benayim is a shirayim, and therefore you have to wait. First, bring the kaimitz and the shirayim. Let's worry the other way around. Maybe the benayim is not shirayim. Maybe benayim is part of the kaimitz, and the rule is that once you put the kaimitz on the mizbech, you cannot put another part of the kaimitz on the mizbech. So how can you put the benayim on the mizbech? Over here we have another problem. Once you put it on the fire, you can no longer. What do you call it? You cannot, once you put it on the fire, you cannot put anything on the mizbeach from the shirayim. And maybe this is shirayim, and if it's shirayim, how can you put it back afterwards? Just like you cannot put it on before, because the problem with the kaimitz, nor can you put it on after, because the problem with shirayim. The shirayim cannot go on the mizbeach once you put the kaimitz on the mizbeach. This is what you do. You take the benayim because of the suffix, you put it on the mizbeach afterwards, but you have in mind a condition. And this is what you say. The maktelele shemeitzim, you put on his bech, and you say to yourself, look, if this is part of the kaimitz, then fine, then it's kaimitz. But if it's not part of the kaimitz, shirayim, then I'm treating this as firewood, that it should help burn other things. And how do you know you can do that? Rabbi Lezer. Like Rabbi Lezer says, we're talking about a case of the limbs of the chattas that were left over, and you started to burn already the fats and everything else. And what happened was the limbs of the chattas got mixed up with the limbs of an oila. By an oila, everything is burned in the mizbech, and by a chattas, it goes to the kohenim. So what do? So Rabbi Lezer says you place everything atop of the mizbech, and you say as follows: that the flesh, the part of the chattas that belongs to the kohen, and it's now in mizbech, but it shouldn't be. So I want you to know that whichever of those limbs over there is the chattas, I want it to be treated like firewood to help burn the fire. So it's not there as a carbon. And so no, instead of possible on mizbech layal is only if you're doing it as a carbon. You cannot bring the shirayim as a carbon, but you can bring it up there as wood. Says okay, makes sense. He says you can make that condition. Who say you cannot make that condition. What do you do with the part between your fingers? Now this is very interesting. Amadi says, you know what? The kamtzi shmeina. We have fat koini or koini with fat fingers. What do you call it? That we have so by having koini with fat fingers, so therefore by kimitza, the part between the fingers, because it's fat fingers, so therefore there's nothing that gets stuck. The fingers are so closely compressed to each other that nothing gets stuck. So when it comes to kimitza, we make sure that the koinim who are doing it are fat. Says the Gemara. So hashta the asalachinala, you tell me that koinim have fat fingers, so there's nothing stuck between. Rabbi Lezer also agree that chatchila is better to have fat koinim. So comes up in the Gemara, an interesting thing. A requirement we had in the Gemara before, the requirement for a kohen should be tall, it should be handsome, it should be rich, etc., etc. You should also be fat, or at least have fat fingers. So there should be nothing stuck between the fingers. It won't have the shaila in the first place. And the Achreim talk about how come the Rambam doesn't bring down as a requirement. So others maybe want to say that fat fingers doesn't necessarily mean fat fingers. It means that he treats his fingers like fat people, that he makes sure that he holds his fingers so tight together that no flour can creep in to the area between his fingers. Otherwise, you have these shilas. What do you do with it? The next Hogamara is Rav Papa has numerous questions, interesting questions. We have a few times in Shas where Rav Papa comes along with interesting questions. Boy, Rav Papa. Okay, we talked about between your fingers when it comes to a kaimitz. What about bein habenayim? Well, how do you treat the bein habenayim between your fingers when it comes to the titus? What happens there, Mao? Saying, what am I coming by? What exactly is this question? This question was like we said before. Do we learn, remember we had before an unresolved question, do you learn from a kaimitz? Do you learn that that you should not have a utensil, you have to do it with your fingers, same thing here, or maybe here is different. Similar shaila. If your question is, do we learn the Gzei Shabbat, but don't learn the Gzei Shabbat, it's exactly what we learned before. So what's he asking new? It says the pasuk. It should be a fistful, and you should bring it in to the base of Migdus, and therefore vayika. The fact is, forget the Gzei Shabbat. Remember we said before, we don't know about the Gzei Shabbat. Which way, one way or another. So the question is, so it is the vortiz. It says all the Torah should be brought into the base, into the Kodesh Yudasha. Well, it is. What's the difference if it's sitting in your palm or sitting between your fingers? The heavy bina vayika, there is a dilma, or the beginning of the pasuk where it says velokach, which means deliberately take it, the heavy bring it in. In other words, you have to have kavana, v'holeka, and that you don't have because it sort of got in, it's crept in on its own. You had no kavanah about the potatoes that got stuck between your fingers, and you're not going to take it. That's my question. Forget about the Gzei Shabbat. Within the laws of Chafina, I want to know if the lokach goes on the heavy, that has to be deliberate, or as long as you brought it in, it's good enough. Particularly, no question to me. When the Torah says by commit that it has to be a full hand, full kmitza is kidikamtzincha, like people normally do. You put your hand in vertically into the flour. And then you take your 3 fingers and you scoop the flour into your hand and you close up. That's how you normally do kmitza. What about kamat barashi etzba oisa? What about you turn your hand and you put it horizontally, facing down, and you take your fingers vertically down, and you scoop up the flour into your hand? Is that considered kmitza or not? And you make sure you fill your whole hand. Is that considered kmitza or not? Because that's not the normal way of doing it. Is comats but Rosh Hashanah. Question number 1. Question number 2. What about mumato lemay? The other way around. You took your hand, you turn it upside down, and you push your hand down into the flour. And as your hand goes down in the flour, sinks in the flour. Flour starts, filling your hand because your hand now is coming down. Your hand is horizontal, but your back of your hand is on the flour, and you're pushing it down. And then with your fingers, you're scooping flour into your hand above. How do we treat that? Was it Minatz Dodin, Mao? Let's say, what about what about you put your hands down vertically and you putting into your fingers as well? So what is the din then? So what would the din be then? So in other words, in this case over here, you put your hand all the way down into the flour, and instead of using your fingers, it just comes in by itself from the sides. Now, as you push your hand down, in the case before, you're using your fingers to scoop in the what do you call it, the flour. Here, you're just pushing your hand down, and the flour just falls inside. What happens then? In all of these questions, this is Teku. All of this by Kmitza, it's a question. Papa says, I'm going to have a similar question when it comes to chafina. Pshitali, there's no question to me. Taylor wants you to scoop it, both fistfuls. You put your hand inside and you scoop it out. So what about, right, your hand is on the bottom and you scoop it into your hands. So my question is, what about milmata, milmaila, mahu? What about if you do it not the normal way? Again, you push your hands all the way, the back of your hands all the way down, and it fills up by itself. What happens then? I mean, atzad mao, you put your hand in sideways, what's in it then? Chofen bezu ubezu v'karbazetzu, or you did both hands separately and then you put them together afterwards. No, you scoop with one hand, you scoop with another hand, and then you brought them together. Mao, you did both hands at the same time. Take all of these, I remain a question. Boy, Papa has another question. What about if Dovke back to the Kmitza? What about a Dovke lekaimitz bedoifnei demana? What about, you know that when it comes to kaimitz, you have to then put it inside a keli, and right, you take out from the mincha and then you put it into another keli. Kmitza, you put it in another keli. So what happened? The second keli you put it in, you didn't put it on the bottom of the keli in the center. You stuck it to one of the sides of the wall. My toich keli binavi, because the Torah wants you to put it inside the keli, and you did. You have to put it down on the floor of the keli. Well, lucky you didn't. Take a question. Similar boy Marbarashi of chelamana. Let's say you turn the vessel upside down, and the bottom of the vessel also has a little bit of a rim. So there you could put things. Obviously, primarily you're supposed to use the keli, the other way around. But you turn the keli upside down. You have a little bit of a rim, and you place it in there. But dafka the claim is ba'arisa the mana. You place it in the back of the keli and the bottom, but there's a rim. Mao hanocha b'teicha bin. The fact is, it's inside the keli as well. Ideal manocha kitikuni bin. You have to be the normal way of using this keli. Teku. It's a question, and it's a question. I'm gonna stop over here. And good Shabbos, everybody. And we'll continue with Hashem at 7:00 tomorrow night.
Okay. I think maybe the Maharsha answers or addresses some of your questions about Rishmal ben Kimchis.
Yeah,
he said
look it up.
He says Erev Yom Kippur Hava from the Yerushalmi, but
yeah, but Rashi says Yom Kippur. No, I'm talking about Rashi.
So
was not even.
He says Yerushalmi Erev Yom Kippur Hava. He says that it was an Erev Yom Kippur.
Exactly. So it makes my question stronger. Rashi clearly says Pam Machas Yom Kippurim Haya on Yom Kippur proper. You're right. Others say that. I'm trying to understand Rashi. Rashi learns it happened on Yom Kippur Mamish.
Yeah, okay, maybe he's correcting it. Maybe he's saying that it was something else.
Magia Rashi.
I don't know.
Okay, but
unless it was
why it's after the mother, not the father, and he says it's the same Rabbi Shmuel ben
Papi.
Which is the father.
Unless it was the time of Tosus Yom Kippurim.
So who cares then? There's nothing else to do.
So that's Erev Yom Kippur still, but it's Tosus. So that's what Rashi says it's Yom Kippur.
Yeah, but then what do is go to mikveh, and the next morning he's all right. There's no avodah that night. And if it's Erev Yom Kippur and Tosus, he jumps into the mikveh, and then he's all right.
Also, the question is, what is he doing outside Erev Yom Kippur? He's secluded for 7 days. He shouldn't be out.
And he's walking in a marketplace, Bashuk. This is the most dangerous place. You pass the pandemic around everywhere. Okay, so the Mashal it maybe bring. Is he saying that's Pshat Rashi, or is just bring another Pshat in the Gemara?
It says Beperish Rashi Pam Achad Yom Kippurim Hava Chulu, and then he just brings in B'Yerushalmi Erev Yom Kippur Hava. It's in the Chidush Haggadus.
So it doesn't mean that he's saying that's Pshat Rashi. He's just saying he's learning you that the Rishalmi learned this question and says, okay, you have to look into it further. What actually happened here? I'm looking at the Shagizaya. He doesn't pick anything up. Nothing. Interesting. Okay.